Good evening, everybody. It's past now, so if we may, we'll kick this one off. Bit of housekeeping first. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located at the side of this room. Exit through reception and meet in the War Memorial Park. This meeting is being webcast live on the internet and will be available to view on YouTube after the meeting. Can I ask everybody to please either switch off or turn silent their mobile phones? Thank you. Right. Apologies for absence and substitutions. Councillor Jeans is replaced by Councillor Malalini. Councillor Husky is replaced by Councillor Slimin. Councillor Phillimore is replaced by Councillor Harvey. Councillor Durrant has sent his apologies, and Councillor Tom has sent his apologies, their apologies. Right, thank you. Does anybody wish to declare any declarations of interest? No? Thank you very much. Urgent matters? I have no urgent matters. Does Robert have any urgent matters? No? Thank you very much. Minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of February. Does anybody wish to make any comments about that? No? Thank you very much. So we now get to the meat on the bone. Number 5, amendments to Hackney Carriage and Private Hire Licensing Policy. So perhaps Robert would like to introduce that to start with.
Thank you, Chair. This is technically a game of 4 halves. That's my best one of the evening. So the first part is the private hire changes to the private hire driver's knowledge test. We then have 2 that look at proposed changes to the Hackney Carriage terms and conditions. And then lastly, a very quick one to give the Head of Environment and Community the ability to make a minor change to the policy once we have some detail coming out of government with regard to the regulatory changes with relation to vehicle specifications, which I don't think anybody is going to have any excitement for whatsoever. But we'll start with the more interesting elements, which is firstly the private hires. So I'm very pleased to be able to say that after a long period of decline, we are now seeing an increase in the number of private hire driver applications into the borough, which is very welcome. As you can see from the background, the situation with licensed drivers since 2019 nationally has seen a very steady and inexorable decline. I won't go over the reasons for that again, but obviously COVID and the number of journeys that were available during that time have been key. And as a result of that, a lot of drivers also went across to the burgeoning home delivery business, which obviously offers people a much nicer working hour, more reliable pay, and a lot less grief for nighttime economy work. However, we are now pleased to say that the number of private hire drivers is starting to increase, and that is shown on page 15 of your report in Appendix 1. Which shows you that the number of private hire drivers for 2023 shows a considerable uplift from 2022. I am not in any way saying that the issues of difficulty with drivers turning up on time or overbooking by operators those problems will remain with us for some time. And partly that has been exacerbated by societal changes, for example, as the cost of living has increased, and through the increase in home working, quite a lot of families that used to operate 2 cars now operate 1 car. And that gap is being met by the private hire trade. So there is, whilst we have seen an increase in the numbers of drivers, there has also been an increase in the amount of work that those drivers are expected to do. So that gap between people's expectations and needs will require some tackling, even though the numbers look promising. We, as ever, are in close negotiation with our colleagues in the trade and working with them as to how we, as a licensing authority, can support the trade, bearing in mind that we cannot force people to become private hire or hackney carriage drivers. That is a career decision for people. But what we can do is make sure that the process is as straightforward as is possible. Now, those of you who have undertaken training with me will know that there is quite a convoluted route to becoming a driver. It is one of the most heavily legislated professions out there because the bedrock of it is public safety. And we need to take all the relevant steps to ensure that public safety is maintained. Our role as a licensing authority is to ensure public safety. Rather bizarrely, we do not have any pressures upon us to ensure there is an adequate number of drivers. That is the free market. But we do need to ensure that the required steps are taken and that unnecessary steps are removed. And that is why I am proposing to you this evening, indeed recommending to you, that one of the requirements within our current knowledge test, that of the geographical element, is removed from the private hire driver's knowledge test. That's obviously quite a big change, and I'm sure that there will be plenty of people who are listening to this podcast are thinking, why are we doing that? Surely that's a downgrade in the potential service that I achieve or receive. The reason is quite simple. The private hire industry has seen a whole-scale transformation over the last decade as computer-aided tracking, GIS systems and dispatch mechanisms have come into place. Gone are the days when there was somebody literally sat there behind a desk with a copy of Yellow Pages, a sheet of paper, jotting down the jobs and going, car number 7, can you go to Cleckheaton Street, please? And pick up Mrs. Miggins from number 7. Those days are well and truly over. Drivers now receive all their communication through their PDA, and that PDA tells them who they're picking up, where they're picking them up, where they're taking them to, and importantly, where the journey should go. And that is optimized based on traffic conditions and all sorts of other variables. And that is now almost universal in the private hire trade. There will still be some smaller operators, mainly who undertake chauffeur work and things like that, who obviously manage their own diaries. But for the majority of the bigger operators, it will certainly all be done electronically. As such, drivers are encouraged, in fact required, to follow the navigational route given to them. They are not encouraged to go off-piste and take various other routes. So it seems little point in that situation of giving drivers or requiring drivers to have a large amount of knowledge of the area if they're going to be told where to go. Now, don't get me wrong. Would I rather they know the area like the back of their hand and know exactly where they're going at all times? I think that is the case. I'm sure we would all wish that. But realistically, I'm sure you're all aware that with new housing developments coming up in all sorts of areas, it doesn't take long to find that you've suddenly got an extra 10 streets. In fact, satellite navigation may be the only way you would find your way in those 10 streets. So my first recommendation here is that we remove the geographical requirement from the private hire knowledge test. That is not the case for the Hackney carriage test, who obviously are not dispatched electronically. They are hired on the street, and we would expect those drivers to have a decent working knowledge of where they're going. That's not to say that they can't use an electronic device if that's what they wish to do, but I expect most people would expect that. Whilst we're some way off the London knowledge test of people riding around on motorbikes and taking them 2 years to learn on the streets, I think we would wish to retain that for our Hackney carriage drivers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Robert. Can I ask Peter Dainty to step forward, please, as you wish to?
Chair, sorry. Peter will represent the Hackney trade rather than the private hire.
I was going to give him the opportunity to speak at this point. You finished?
Sorry, Chair, any comments I had would be HCL, doesn't be relevant to the private hire side.
No, okay.
Thank you, but I'll speak later on. Yes, we reference HC, not PH, sorry.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much. So you've finished your piece, have you, Robert? Okay, fine. Right. I think the sensible thing to do is, if I may, is we've got a number of decisions to make here. It seems to me that the easiest way is to take the recommendations one by one and then vote on them and then move on to the next one. So if we can start with the geographical element of the knowledge test for the private hire drivers. Right. Councillor Patti.
Thanks, Chairman. Rob, the way that you're saying about private hire and geographical knowledge and also the GIS and to take them, it's becoming similar to the one the Uber use, like more or less. And also what is happening when we use satellite, not always really take you to the place that you want to go. So how do we really overcome that?
Yeah, I'm always very careful about drawing any analogies with Uber. I'm not sure that that's the perfect business model, but they have certainly elevated it to a very high level. We may, I'm sure, get some questions about Uber later on in the hearing, but the model is basically the same. Yes, it's you look at where you know where all your vehicles are at any one time within your fleet, and you can therefore dispatch the nearest vehicle to that location. So they don't have to go out, do the job, and then come back to base. They can go out from one job to the next job to the next job to the next job. So that algorithm is there. Yes, there is always some variability in the sat-navs. Yeah, I think we've all had those moments, though there are less and less within a confined area. Are they better or worse than a driver's knowledge? Probably better. I hate to say that. But yes, I mean, there will always be the differences between, Wimbledon Avenue and Wimbledon Road, for example. They could be in two completely different parts of the town.
Councillor Mamalina.
Thank you very much for the report. I'm a bit new, but however, my question is, are we the first people to do this one, or did we have any other organizations or other councils who have taken this decision to ban this entire local knowledge test?
I think it would be fair to say, Councillor, that different authorities operate very different schemes. There are plenty of authorities now that are dropping the geographical knowledge test. Equally, there a few years ago, Bath attempted to ban drivers from using electronic devices. That didn't last very long.
Councillor Kodcheka.
Just wanted to ask you, if we're going to do this for private hire, do you think it's going to be fair on the Hackney carriages? Because we're sort of giving advantage to the competition, aren't we, by taking that out?
I don't think it's an advantage, Councillor. It is here as a way of streamlining the application process to get drivers through for the private hire trade. I wish that we were inundated with new Hackney carriage applicants, but alas, that is not the case. Most of our Hackney carriage applicants would come through the private hire route anyway, so that most of them would be private hire drivers who then move on to being Hackney carriage, by which time they should have a reasonable working knowledge of the town anyway. The Hackney carriage trade is of a different nature to the private hire, and I'm sure that's something that we'll come on to discuss later on. But the fundamental difference is that ability to be hired in the street or off the street with no notice of where you're going to go. Yeah, you literally rock up, say to the driver, I want to go to X, whereas a private hire driver, by the time he or she has picked you up, already knows where you're supposed to be going.
Yeah, but with the new technology, I can pick someone up from the street if I was a Hackney carriage driver and say, okay, tap it into my sat nav, even the phone, and do the same thing as a private hire. That's where I'm coming from. In a sense, it's not fair on them because they're basically got the same technology. The only difference is they're not getting it in advance. So that's the way I'm looking at things. I might be wrong, but that's my point of view.
I think it's a perfectly valid point of view. I am more than happy to look at that as a potential change to the Hackney carriage policy going forward. Yeah, it's not in the argument for today, but I'm certainly happy to bring it up again at a future hearing. I don't want to steal Emma's thunder, but we're probably looking at reviewing the Hackney carriage and private hire licensing policy in November this year anyway, so we can discuss it then as an option then.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. I presume there's been an element of consultation to get us this far. What would you say was the response from the industry locally to you in the proposal?
We haven't consulted with the private hire drivers per se. We have consulted with a number of the private hire operators, one of whom is represented here today, Mr. Dinning, and this has certainly been welcomed by them as operators.
Thank you. Councillor Patti.
Yes, just one of the things that I wanted to know, can I call you Rob? Yeah, Rob, is mainly, is it the inbuilt in the car sat-nav that they are going to use, or is it they're going to use their phone sat-nav?
The whole basis of this, Councillor, is that it is their phone sat-nav, which they have mounted. But that is the device by which they receive their work. They get directed by it. You know, they sign on and out of the jobs with it. And it is the same technology, obviously, that many people rely on within their vehicles today to navigate around with. So it's perfectly legally compliant with what it is. And as I say, the unit itself will direct them, yeah, and then, you know, without any further, all they do is they say, right, I've arrived at my destination. They press the depart button and the unit tells them where they're going to go.
Councillor Jones. Sorry, Councillor next.
Hi, yeah, on the sat-nav, I welcome this actually. I've got one question on the sat-nav or what the system. Does it throw up a price? Because you're talking private hire, so they know where you're going and everywhere else. Now you can ask for a price, as most people do, but if you don't, is there a price showing what that journey will cost on that one?
The price of any private hire journey should be agreed at the point of booking. That's a key function of it. So whether you're from the back of the vehicle, you're not going to be able to read the display. That's the long and short of it. It's not like having a meter in any carriage where, you know, the cost is there ticking over. But you should have, if you've either booked through your phone or you've spoken to the operator, you should know how much that journey is going to cost, because that must be declared before the journey commences.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from. It would be nice to make sure, because it doesn't always happen. I don't think you're being caught by these companies, but it would be nice to know if you've got in a cab, a private hire, that what the cost is if you haven't bothered to ask. But I'll just throw that one in. And secondly, like all the IT, it's great when it works. What happens when it doesn't, especially in this town? We've got loads of new estates. By the time they're registered on these sat navs and things, it can be a long time. How are we going to get around that? Is there any talk of that? As I say, I do welcome this. I think it's a way forward. I don't want to block it, but there's some issues that will come up at some stage, or one of the new housing estates or anything like it did years ago, and we never had technology then.
I think it's a fair comment about how frequently these sat-nav systems are updated, but these are big commercial systems. You know, they're not some little fly-by-night outfits. These are people who supply systems on a national basis. So they have a vested interest because they charge the operators a very high fee for this, the sort of fee that would make your and my eyes water if we were using it for private use. It's a commercial tool. It is there to reduce operator costs in the form of fuel and driver time. And operators will not be tolerant of systems that do not function quickly, efficiently and accurately.
Councillor Slimmon, apologies for missing your hand the first time.
Thank you. I'd like to support this motion. I have been using the local taxi firms recently. I came back from Oxford, having been to the theatre, and the buses had just gone. So I actually went to the office and booked one, and they were very efficient. And there is a big notice board up to tell you exactly how much it is to go to Tadley. It's £17, or it was then. It might have gone up a little bit since then, but I'm sure they keep it updated. And you do know, as somebody, I also used them up in Hatfield and Welwyn Garden City when I was working, and you know which vehicles come in. You get the registration of the vehicle. You know what type of vehicle to look out for. They come in to pick you up, whether you're outside a station or you're in the street. You know where they're coming to. And I found it very efficient, and I think it's a very good thing to have. And I certainly think with modern technology we have to move forward, and I very much welcome this.
Any further comments to be made? No? Are we in agreement with this proposal? Everybody agrees? Thank you very much. We'll move on if we wait. Number 2. At this point, perhaps we get Mr. Dainty up. Good evening, Peter. You've got two minutes. I am willing to be generous if you feel you need slightly longer.
Thank you very much. That's very
But I would like to make the point at this stage that I don't think it's necessary or useful for the committee to question Mr. Dainty after he said his piece. When we discuss the whole issue between us, we can all express our comments then. So I would prefer it if we didn't have questions for Mr. Dainty afterwards. Over to you, Peter.
Okay, thanks. Just 2 comments reference the Hackney Carriage side with the recommendations. Basically, the report looks like it's a holding pattern because we're in a situation where we know that there's a lack of drivers coming through. And Hackney Carriage side, it's really, really, really bad, as we know, as we discussed before. So if I can just deal with the first part, pollution, and then the rear loaders. On the pollution side, the Euro 4, Euro 5, they are the most polluting vehicles, and we do have a need to look at vehicles in that way. At the moment, we have no air pollution issues in Basingstoke, and I don't believe there's an issue for a ULEZ either. The 4 and the 5 serve a purpose in as much as that if we lose 10% of the fleet, my understanding is we'll go below 47 maybe even down as far as 42. We're having trouble dealing with what we've got at the moment. So if we lose effectively 10% of our existing fleet, then we're going to have problems. So what I'm basically saying is they have a function, and they have a bigger function maybe than the small pollution that they're providing, in as much as there's only a few of them. If we drive out, I came in from Oakley today, there's proposals to put 3,000 houses up there. So what's that, 6,000 cars? All of those are going to be electric. All of those are going to be less than Euro 4s, Euro 5s? Doubt it. So the pollution that's going to be caused simply by providing the need that we do have for additional housing is going to create much more pollution than about half a dozen vehicles or 4 vehicles at the moment that are desperately needed to provide a service in the town. And we've all seen it, we all know. We know the waiting times, we know the issues. So Euro 6, the Euro 6 vehicle we have at the moment is the least polluting. It's as good as many petrols. Yet we're talking about an exit policy for those. There shouldn't be an exit policy for those. It should be based on the vehicle condition. Ages are very arbitrary. You know, you can have a vehicle that might be 5 years old. It's a lot worse than a vehicle that's 15 years old. So we would suggest that maybe the Euro 4, Euro 5 should be extended by 2 years, and Euro 6 should be looked at as an individual with a no exit. Now if we move on to rear loaders were discussed in Parliament, and Parliament raised lots of concerns about rear loaders. Radar did, the AA did, RAC, ROSPA. All of these people were concerned about spinal injuries to the rear of the vehicle that could be increased more for the disabled person being travelling, and driver deaths. Parliament reckons there should be a risk assessment. Have we done a risk assessment on rear loaders regarding spinal injury to the travelling public? Have we done it with regard to drivers? Necessary, I think, to be looking at these things before we move to rear loaders, if we move to rear loaders. When we had the meeting recently, I think it was 17 of us turned up. I think there were 3 4-road loaders, rear loaders, and the rest were for the gold standard, the standard that exists today in Basingstoke. We think with a tweak of what we're asking for today, we can still achieve that gold standard. The number of times I've come here since the 1980s and been told we want to run a gold standard, we can still have our gold standard if we have a look at these sections of these proposals that we're asking you to look at this evening. So really, we need to look at the pollution side again, I think, and we need to look at the rear loading side, because it is a real concern of these major organisations that there should be a risk assessment before these vehicles are brought in to licensing, and I think that that's very relevant. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. We did allow you 4 minutes, but no problem. I feel that what you said is very relevant, and the committee is grateful to hear your views. And now, if we may, we'll go on to discussing the increase the age at which Hackney carriage vehicles will be accepted for licensing from 3 to 6 years. So, can we open the batting on that one, please?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Peter. There are multiple issues with the Hackney carriage trade within Basingstoke. As Peter has already alluded to, Basingstoke at the moment was sometimes referred to as the gold standard, which is the London-style Hackney carriage vehicle. If you go across to Hart, for example, then the Hackney carriage vehicles are just a standard saloon car. If you go to places like Bracknell and Wokingham and Windsor and Maidenhead, all their Hackney carriage vehicles are rear-loading ones. One of the key issues that we're suffering with at the moment in the trade is age, whether that be ages of the drivers, whether that be ages of the vehicles. Now, at the moment, we have a policy that states that vehicles will not be licensed after their 12th birthday. In reality, that means that they get 13 years worth of use out of them, because most people will license their vehicle just before its 12th anniversary. So it's a 13-year life for these vehicles. That generally promotes a turnover of vehicles within the trade, and that hasn't particularly been a great issue for us over the last few years. The problem we've got at the moment is that the hackney carriage trade, much like the rest of the motor trade, is struggling for new vehicles. And some of you will have seen, some of you will have the pleasure, no doubt, of riding in the latest hackney carriage vehicles, either within our own borough, we have one, or within London, which are a hybrid vehicle. So they predominantly run on battery power, and then they have a small 1.5 litre engine that can charge that battery on the move and allow the vehicle to run in that manner, or it can be charged quickly at a fast charging port, which allows it to operate and give a range of approximately 80 miles on battery alone. These are no doubt superb vehicles. I've had the pleasure of bimbling around in a few. They are very pleasant places to be in. They are nice to drive. I've yet to meet a driver who didn't like one. Unfortunately, they're also £65,000. And you can spend a lot more than that if you tick a few boxes. But 65 gets you a basic spec car with side entry loading. That's a lot of money. And it is considerably more than many of the vehicles that are being operated on the rank at this point in time. Now, whilst you've always been able to get London taxis, and they've always been expensive, there have also been alternatives in the form of minibuses and converted medium-sized minibuses for so-called E7 or Eurocabs. And again, we have a number of those vehicles on the rank. Unfortunately, it is those types of vehicles that have been very heavily hit by the switch to electrification and the shortages in semiconductors. As a result of that, there are very few of those vehicles available on the market at the moment, even for people who just want to buy an unconverted one, let alone if you actually want to purchase one as a converter and convert it into a hackney carriage. So there is a shortage of reasonably priced replacement vehicles within the market at this point in time. I've done a few searches on this. I've phoned a number of the principal suppliers. They all say the same, that there is a shortage of stock. Now, one of the things that exacerbates this for our own drivers is that we also have a 3-year onto the fleet policy. So vehicles must be 3 years old or less to become licensed. Once they're licensed, they can stay on the fleet until the age of 12. So this shortage of vehicles and the fact that the key replacement in the London taxi is much more expensive than it used to be is putting pressure on the trade. Now, we as an authority set that standard. So the drivers do not have a decision about what they can have. They can only have what we allow them. So it's not like, say, over in Hart, where they can just go out and buy a normal standard saloon car, which might be £15,000–20,000. They have to have a vehicle that we set the specification for. And that specification has been set, as Peter has mentioned, at the gold standard of the side-loading London-style taxi. Don't get me wrong, would I prefer to keep that as our standard? Yes, I would. But we have to be realistic as an authority. We both set the standard for our hackney carriage drivers, and we set the money they can earn because we set the tariff. And that tariff setting is a balance between ensuring that our drivers can earn a living out of what they do, but also that our residents can afford to take a hackney carriage. We could easily double the fares, but that isn't going to help our residents. So there is a balance there, and this is almost unique within any level of what might otherwise deem to be a free market. Because on one level it is a free market. We don't employ any of the drivers. But equally, they have to have a license from us, they have to have a licensed vehicle from us, and we set how much they can earn, which is a very strange setup. But that is the one that we have. So, the proposals here are that we increase the age at which vehicles can come onto the fleet, which would effectively mean that more vehicles are available for drivers to choose from. Pete has already set out, and I know that you've also had an email from another one of our operators, the case for extending the 12-year life limit. That is not the recommendation before you, though that is an option open to you. That has the advantage for the trade in that there is no capital investment required. The vehicles that have already been bought and paid for stay on the fleet. Hopefully, within a couple of years' time, there will be greater availability of minibuses as new electric vehicles come onto the market and the supply of vehicles increases towards those people who are doing the conversions. And I noticed just last week that Ford have released details of their new mid-sized minibus that will almost certainly be used by converters as a base vehicle. So those vehicles are coming onto the market, but they are not there at this point in time. So my recommendation here is that we keep to the 12-year limit, because that does remove the older and most polluting vehicles. I entirely hear the emissions argument with regards to the number of vehicles that will be in town. But I think there are two things that we bear in mind as an authority, in fact three. One is that obviously we are pushing towards a zero carbon emission thing for the authority, and certainly reducing that. Secondly, these vehicles are used very heavily within the town centre. I hear Pete's point, and it is perfectly correct, that we do not have a specific air pollution issue within Basingstoke. Whether you like the layout of Basingstoke or not, it was designed around the motor vehicle. And as a result, most of the traffic that doesn't need to go through Basingstoke doesn't go through Basingstoke. It zips round the edge around our one-way system and our ring roads. So we do have the benefit of that, but it doesn't alter the fact that these vehicles are still the ones that are operating within our town centre. And that is where pollution levels, whilst they're not particularly high at the moment, are their highest. Thirdly, to come back to the point that's already been discussed, is passenger safety. These are now old vehicles, and the long and short of it is they are not tested and never have been tested to the same level of crash compliance that modern vehicles have. They are of an older style construction with a chassis and a body on top. And their crash performance is not particularly good. So we'll come back to safety with regard to the rear loaders, but I think it's just worth thinking about that these are physically older vehicles. So the recommendation here is that we help to address this by allowing older vehicles to come onto the fleet. Now, because I'm not proposing that we extend the life of these vehicles, that does mean that those vehicles have a shorter operational life. And you may feel, as a group of councillors, that you wish to extend that operational life, which is the news that the trade would wish you to do as well. Again, that is a decision for you, but equally these are cheaper vehicles to bring onto the fleet, so the cost is reduced in the first place. Do you want to leave it there, or do you want me to go on to rear loaders, Chair?
Well, I think we need to vote on this one first and then move on to the one which is probably going to take the most time, which is the rear loaders.
Okay.
So can we confine any comments at the moment to the second recommendation and get that one way or the other out of the way? Anybody wish to make any comments about that? Councillor?
Just on the extended life, which was brought up of the either 12 or 13 years or whatever it is, can there be a cut-off point, not just on years, but on pollution? So if the vehicle is 12 years old and it goes for its, what they call an MOT, I assume, and it's not performing at a level we wish to see, not what the government wishes to see, what we wishes to see, could we not deal with it that way? So if you've got a very good taxi and the admissions are within the bounds of what we set as a council, would that not be a way forward, or would that, or am I talking sort of rubbish?
Oh, I would never say that a councillor talks rubbish, Councillor Jones. I think that is a potential option for us. I think what I would say is that the testing regime, and if you look on page 16 of your report, you can see there the differences in particularly the NOx emissions. So you can see for a Euro 4 the limit is 0.25 grams per kilometre for a Euro 4 vehicle, whereas for a Euro 6 it's 0.08 grams. To achieve better performance than was originally specified, there's probably quite a fine line in there, and the technologies are very different. So for example, those Euro 6 vehicles have got different emissions control that cannot possibly be met by a Euro 4 vehicle. Now we could set the line somewhere in the middle, if you like. I think that would be quite difficult to do. Can we test it? Yeah, we can easily test it. The testing centres have a testing regime. They stick the nozzle at the tailpipe of the vehicle and read off what the emissions are. I think it would require quite a lot of work to set that level, but if that's what you wish to instruct us to go away and do, then we can do so. I do think that there will be challenges doing that. It's not a way that I've seen any other authority do it. Other authorities do it by the Euro standards, because that's a defined legal standard. So yes, it could theoretically be done, but I think it would be challenging.
Thank you. Any further comments? Are we happy to accept this recommendation?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to the third one now. Specifically approve the licensing of rear loading Hackney carriage vehicles and the required passenger capacity as set out in Appendix A. So over to Robert again. Thank you.
I'm sorry that you're having to listen to a lot of me this evening, but okay. Can I draw your attention to page 17, please, in the pack, because I think a picture paints 1,000 words. So at the top there you have the side loading vehicle. This is a Euro 7 type vehicle, so it's not a London Hackney carriage one, but it's compliant with all those regulations. And as you can see, it's a converted minibus. So you can see the vehicle loads from the side, from the pavement, directly into the cabin space. Is this my preferred vehicle of choice? Yes. Without a shadow of a doubt, it is the gold standard, as Pete's pointed out. Below that, you see the two commonest types of rear loading vehicle. And I've put both in there because there is a subtle but important difference between them. So the bottom vehicle, the white vehicle, which you can see is badged up as a taxi there, is the type of vehicle that is commonly licensed across many boroughs and district councils in the UK. Notice, please, that it is a relatively short vehicle. So the capacity of that vehicle is a 4-seater vehicle. Now, at the moment, our policy specifies that the vehicles for Hackney carriage use should be 5-seaters. And in the vehicle at the top, that is accomplished by having 3 rows of seats. There's a large space in the middle, which is where the wheelchair would go. And then you have 2 seats, which you can just see, one in the picture there. that tip down from the bulkhead and face towards the rear of the vehicle. So if you were to put a wheelchair in there, you would not have a 5-seat capacity vehicle. You might get a couple of other people in there if you were lucky. But that is 5 seats. The one at the bottom is 4 seats because the wheelchair passenger goes in the back of the vehicle. So there are 3 seats across, and it is in many ways similar to your normal domestic vehicle that the majority of you will drive. So there isn't a large space when you enter the vehicle. It is a bench seat with 3 seats on it, a relatively narrow space where you go through the vehicle. If they are present, a wheelchair is placed into the rear of the vehicle. So depending on the conversion, most of these will load a rear loading vehicle with those seats in place. Some of them require them to be tipped forward, but most of them will just fit in the back. That is a 4-seater vehicle. If you look at the vehicle above, the silver one, that is a longer wheelbase vehicle. That again has the wheelchair loading into the rear of the vehicle, but it has much more space for the wheelchair. If the wheelchair user is not present, then there are 2 additional seats, one each on each side of the vehicle, that fold down. Now they are full adult seats, don't think they're child seats, they've got a full seat belt. And that effectively makes the vehicle a 6-seater vehicle. 1 in the front, 3 in the middle, 2 in the back. Now that is not the same if you get into the rear seats. You will need to tumble home one of the middle row seats. But we do license those vehicles for private hire use. They're very common, but it's a 6-seater and gives you more space. It is slightly safer in an accident because obviously it's physically a bigger vehicle. And Peter's raised the issue of safety with these vehicles because obviously there is a risk here. Most accidents involve a vehicle hitting into the rear of another one. And obviously the perceived risk to the rear passenger here is that the rear door becomes damaged and inoperable, and it is difficult to extract the wheelchair passenger. Whereas in the current side-loading vehicle, if the rear of the vehicle is impacted, the side doors remain accessible. Now, equally you could argue that if there's a T-bone type accident where the vehicle hits the side of the other, then the door is damaged and getting people out is difficult. Now, for those of you who haven't seen the fire service take the roof off a vehicle, it's not very pretty, but it is pretty effective. And saving life and protecting life is far more important than the condition of the vehicle at the end of the process. But is there a safety issue here? Yes, there is a slight safety issue here. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Have we risk assessed it? No. I'm not going to pretend to you that we've done a specific risk assessment of this. Have other authorities licensed these, several thousand of them across the country? Yes. So am I concerned about it as a risk? No, not particularly. But is it as safe as the current vehicles? I would probably say no. I want to be completely honest with you on this effect. There is also the issue that whereas in the side loading vehicle you load off the pavement, in a rear loading you load onto or off the road. That is obviously not as safe as loading from the pavement. However, accidents where people are injured by being wheeled out of these vehicles are not a concern for other licensing authorities because they still license them. And in many authorities they are the predominant type of hackney carriage. So I am not going to say that there is the same level of risk because that is patently not the case. But am I concerned that the risk is of an unacceptable nature? Then I would say to you, no, I do not believe it is of unacceptable nature. Would we be required to undertake some changes to our current rank arrangements? The answer is yes. Those of you who have used the station rank will know that there is actually quite a high elevated curb there to stop vehicles mounting the curb. Not that I think that's ever happened, but anyway, if we were to license rear loading vehicles, then we would need to drop that curb, and we would need to mark up a clear area at the front of the rank to allow additional space behind that lead vehicle to give the space to deploy the ramp, and then the space for the wheelchair passenger to come out and go up into the ramp space. So yes, it would require a change, but I don't think that's an unreasonably large change, and we could accomplish that fairly straightforwardly. The other issue here is primarily about cost. And again, you'll be pleased to know that I spent a lot of time doing my homework, and I've spoken to several of the adapters of these vehicles. Some of you may have had experience of these vehicles. They are commonly used by disabled people, other than in Hackney carriage things. So there's quite a number of companies that already undertake these conversions, either as private domestic vehicles, but it's not a great step forward to convert them into Hackney carriages. Those companies are saying that there is good availability, even at this time, of vehicles for conversion. In fact, some of them had vehicles pre-prepared and ready to go. Those vehicles typically cost around £30,000 brand new for a 4-seater vehicle, or £40,000 for a 6-seater vehicle, depending obviously on the cost of the vehicle, and there's a range of different models available. That is obviously still a considerable chunk of money, but it is 2/3 of the cost of a London carriage, London Electric Vehicle Company side-loading Hackney carriage. The purpose of suggesting this is twofold. One is to increase the availability of vehicles, because suddenly you get both sorts of vehicles that are available, and secondly to improve the price that these are available at to bring into the trade. Peter's voice is well made about the number of Hackney carriage vehicles, but part of the problem is the cost of entry into the profession. You can enter into the private hire trade with £15,000–20,000 worth of decent diesel car. That is not the case for Hackney carriages. So this makes it easier to enter the trade, and for existing drivers with existing vehicles to renew their vehicles. It is a substantial change for us as an authority. We haven't done this before. And this type of vehicle would be, if you approve it, be on the fleet for 12 years. So it would be a big change going forward. All of these vehicles are currently diesel powered, because that is where we're at. If we are looking to decarbonise our fleet, then these are diesel powered vehicles that will be on our fleet for another 12 years. Now again, they are not available in an electrified form at this point in time, but they will be. Now there's some challenges here, as you can see from the back of the vehicle on page 17. One of the issues is that quite often the access is through the rear bumper, and the back of the vehicle folds down to form part of the ramp. You can see that clearly there. Now that's fine in a diesel powered vehicle, because that space generally is occupied by the spare wheel, which you can do without. Unfortunately, in many electrified vehicles, it's where the battery sits, and you can't put a hinge in a battery. So it's going to be a little more challenging. Do I know whether those vehicles will be suitable? There's none in the market at the moment. I can't tell you. But what I can tell you is that they would be Euro 6 compliant, which is currently as good as it gets with an internal combustion engine. So I think there's two questions for you to answer here. Firstly is, do we as an authority wish to go down the rear loading vehicle route? If you do wish to do that, do you wish to accept four-seater vehicles, of which there are a lot in the second-hand market at this point in time, but they are smaller? Or do you wish to restrict it to six-seater vehicles, which are obviously more expensive but slightly safer? There is no perfect answer here, like that, but those are the facts of the case.
Thank you, Robert. Can I just ask you a very quick question and start the ball rolling? If we were to decline to accept this recommendation, what do you think? What exactly would be the impact on the service which we are able to offer the public in this ward, in this borough?
I think, as Pete has quite eloquently set out, the Hackney carriage trade is in a difficult place at this point in time. They have the driver age profile is very skewed towards the older age bands. The vehicle age bands are very skewed towards the older vehicles. And we need to give drivers some scope to obtain some more cost-effective vehicles. I think that if you as an authority decide not to license rear-loading vehicles, then I think you will need to have a look possibly at the route that has already been suggested by the trade of extending the life of the existing vehicles. Because I think at this point in time, the vehicles, there are simply no replacement vehicles unless you're going to make a very substantial investment in your business. Now, the thing that isn't in this paper is whether we should assist drivers with that purchase on the grounds that that meets some of our climate change objectives. The reason it isn't in this paper at this point in time is it's a substantial investment. I think there are some moral and ethical issues about whether we support bits of small business within the town but don't support others. So I'm not asking that question of you today. But again, that's something that we possibly will need to look at moving forward, but we need something sooner than that, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. My first question is, the existing side loading vehicles, are they petrol cars?
No, they are almost universally diesel.
Okay.
The only one that isn't universally diesel is our sole London electric vehicle car, which is hydrogen.
Okay. So just listening to what you've said, if we approve these vehicles, we're approving it for the next 12 years, and that's a diesel one, and I don't think it's fitting in with our climate change emergency policies.
All I'm saying, sorry to interrupt, at the moment, the policy states that the vehicles will remain on for 12 years. Yeah. Obviously, we can change the policy any year we like. Yeah. So, but all I'm saying is that in the normal run of things, as we stand at the time, those vehicles would be on the fleet for 12 years. And I think that the trade needs to have a defined period that they can spread their cost over. So they would want to know, that if they license the vehicle today, it's still going to be usable in 12 years' time, because that's where they make their money and over that life of that vehicle.
That actually leads me on to my next question is, as a council, if we were to approve this tonight and then 4 years' time we've got a different set of councillors sat around this table, could we then reduce that limit, because that wouldn't be fair to our drivers?
It is a political decision. As a man who works very closely with the trade, I would urge you not to do that sort of thing, because that's a level of, we control these gentlemen and ladies far more than we control any other business within the town. Yeah, and I think we need to be fair to them as businesses, to allow them to do their financial planning and to invest. Effectively they have to pay off the vehicle they've got and start saving for the next vehicle throughout the economic life of the current vehicle, if that makes sense.
I completely agree with you on that, and that's why I raised the point, because I think it is a bit risky. So for me personally, I would rather say no to the rear loading and then extend the side loading by another 2 years, so up to the 14 years. That's my view. I don't know if anyone wants. Yeah, can I propose that?
But can we leave that
No.
until we open the discussion up?
Okay, that's my view then. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Kacheka.
Thank you, Chair. I want to be flexible because people have got mortgages and things to pay. I don't mind if they've got a rear entry vehicle as well as a side one, but I would go for the slightly larger, more seats one. Another thing is, I don't know, I'm probably going off the point where you mentioned about diesel vehicles. There was something I saw, I watched strange documentaries where people were converting taxis to use fish and chip shop oil basically, and they did something to the system where it made it less pollution in the air than a diesel vehicle, and the taxi drivers up there have done that. This was about 4 or 5 years ago. So there's always other opportunities we can look at for the current vehicles as well. And also I want to make this flexible, as I said, because it's going to be cheaper for them to buy these vehicles. Plus, as I said, they've got other things in their life they need to sort of cover, costs, etc. So that's what I wanted to say, really. Thank you.
Councillor Patti.
Thanks, Chairman. Yes, I really think what Peter has put forward about the risk is very valuable to us, really, to think about it. And the rear loader, when I'm looking at it, I have got another concern and another risk, because in the picture itself, when we see the pavement and the people going, and especially nowadays, all these electric scooters going swiftly around, and I really feel that
Can we keep to questions to Robert to
Yeah.
start with, and then
Yeah.
when we finish that, we'll
Can
throw
we-
the discussion open.
because the rear loader, when the people are going, first it has got the risk because it's on the road. There's another vehicle that can come at the back of it. And the next one is when people are already in, there is also the risk if the car stops suddenly. So there is, what are the provisions really made for all that?
So the way these vehicles work is that there is 2 restraint systems. One is the restraints that go in to lock the wheelchair in place, and then the passenger themselves have a 3-point belt that comes across them in the same way that you would have a 3-point belt in a normal car. So it's not significantly different to the types of restraints that are used in the side-loading vehicle, which again require the passenger to be strapped in and the seat to be strapped in as well. In the side-loading vehicle, it's possible to load the passenger facing backwards. But again, effectively, the passengers are always restrained in a safe manner. There's no, I don't think from a passenger restraint point of view, there is a significant change in the risk depending on whether they're rear or side loading.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. I have the feeling that I need a bit more research here, a bit more information. We've got a really good cohort of Hackney carriage drivers. We know them, they're good. They've got good vehicles. And obviously to not allow the rear loaders would be an encouragement to them. They get on with a really good job. But they are a diminishing creature in Basingstoke. And so we're trying to increase the number. In your experience and what you know of the market, how likely is it that by introducing the rear loaders, we would be actually attracting new Hackney carriage drivers to Basingstoke? Or is there something else here that's causing it all to diminish? From my point of view, I think it's because they don't use apps. You know, people like to know that there's a vehicle for them when they want it, not just coming out of the station, but when they've finished a meal or something. So in your experience, do you think that by introducing these rear loaders, it really would attract new drivers to Basingstoke?
I think that the bar to entry within the Basingstoke trade is predominantly the vehicle. Whilst I can't make people become Hackney carriage drivers, traditionally we had people who moved over from private hire. I think that if we were to reduce the capital investment required to enter the trade, we may develop a more flexible and different style of trade to what we have at the moment. At the moment, the Hackney carriage trade is solely based out the train station, and there is no significant competition between the Hackney carriage trade out there and the nighttime economy offered by private hire. At the moment, it's virtually a split between the two. We've got numerous ranks across the town, but only one of which is used. My personal preference would be to get some people into the Hackney carriage trade who would like to offer some competition for the nighttime economy and to use some of those other ranks. Because people don't see vehicles on those ranks, they don't consider them as an option. They may be prepared to walk up to the station, particularly if they're at that end of town, and take a cab home. But you're right, there is a technological difference here, and the direction of travel within the industry is towards app-based private hire provision and away from black cab Hackney carriage use, because that's how people choose to interact with it. Now, I'm not aware of anybody who uses apps for black cabs, if you like. They can be booked through private hire apps, yeah. But black cabs tend to be, on the whole, small single operator businesses. I know that we have Louis at the back there, who operates, I think it's 4 vehicles on the rank. But that's the exception rather than the rule. Yes, I think there are some technological challenges to how the traditional Hackney carriage business model has worked. And yeah, I think that's the nature of the trade within Basingstoke has also moved against that.
So could I just ask about apps? Because I looked online and there are some towns and cities that do have apps, but obviously that involves you've got to join together as a unit, and that's always difficult because these are all people who run their own businesses, and I know that's not easy, but you can do it. I mean, all I know is that if I've had a meal at Gabardines and I know that at the end of my meal I can stroll up to Caston's Yard and get a taxi, then I'll do that rather than call a private hire any day of the week, because I prefer the Hackneys. And there are apps that would allow you to do that. So, but you think that if we can attract new Hackney drivers in, it will open up these other ranks again, and we'll be able to wander around at the end of an evening and find a taxi to hail or to get in. Not just have to go up to the station every time.
We, as a licensing team, cannot control the trade as to where they trade from and how they trade. At the end of the day, the trades have a steady line of business that arrives by Network Rail. Yeah, and you know, there's no criticism here. That's the nature of the trade. You know, and there is no move into the nighttime economy such as you may find in some of the other cities, where you know there are ranks of vehicles away from the train station. Yeah, there's no doubt that will be a big shift in how the trade operates within Basingstoke at this point in time. Would I like to see that shift? Yes, I would like to see that shift. Can I force the trade to do that? No, I can't. Do I think that cheaper vehicles coming onto the trade may encourage people to come in who aren't currently Hackney carriage operators or businesses, which may take a more flexible approach to, you know, they may see a business opportunity elsewhere. That would be great, but I can't hand on heart guarantee that would happen, Councillor.
Councillor Kacheka.
Thank you, Chair. If I get this correct, if I've understood this correct, what you're trying to do is make sure that we have younger drivers coming in and less older vehicles, so the trade doesn't die in Basingstoke. That's what we're essentially saying. Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Any more questions for Robert before we throw the discussion open? Oh, Councillor Slimming, sorry.
Thank you. Peter did mention that the Parliament were looking at the rear loading vehicles, and there's been some concern expressed. I'm just concerned, obviously, things have changed recently on smart motorways, for example, so they spent an awful lot of money in putting things in. Obviously, whatever we decide today, if government decide to do something different, that may affect where we're going. However, I know that people like Age Concern, for example, have rear loading vehicles and put their passengers, their very precious passengers, in the back of these vehicles, and they're quite happy to take them from the lunch club out into Tadley and whatever. So obviously there's always a balance, isn't there, between the risks of what you're doing in the outside world and these people who are obviously running a business rather than a private hire or a charity hire or whatever. So do you think that the government are going to change the rules?
I am not aware of any pressure to remove this, stop these vehicles being converted. They're all conversions, yeah, and they're all conversions of existing vehicles. So they have to meet a certain level of crash resistance, yeah. That's the nature of the beast, if you like. The Hackney carriage vehicles must meet the same standards that an ordinary vehicle has. So, do I think this type of vehicle is going to be outlawed or cut off? No, I don't think it will do. You know, I'm happy to tackle the issue that Pete raised of, are they as safe? Probably not. But are they dangerous? No, I don't think they're dangerous.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you. Well, two things. Catch-22 here, really, because what we're looking for is obviously more Hackney cabs. Cabs are dear, so we're trying to find a way around. There's two things. I don't like the four-seater, and I think it's really doesn't do a lot for the town in my view, but perhaps that's just me as an individual. I wouldn't like to see that on our ranks. We've tried to keep the black cabs for the years. It's been very difficult, and I can understand where we're coming from. The bigger rear loaders, they look fine, so I could live with that. I haven't got a problem in one respect about loading and unloading, because it happens all the time now. As for Hackney carriages, perhaps we should be looking at passing trade, and they set up the train station for a reason, as you said. That's where the customers are. When the top of the town was actually buzzing, which it doesn't do now, as we all know, it's not that. There's no traffic going through there, so they couldn't pick up anything. Perhaps we should be looking at allowing black cabs through on the way back to the ranks, so people can flag them down like they do in London. That's part of the problem we got in this town. You either go to a station, which is the train station, to get your black cab, or you phone up or with your app and whatever and get a private hire. we don't actually flag, very few people flag down a black cab, and that's something as a council we should be looking at. A number of years ago we looked at the different places for them to park up so they can get trade. It didn't work, let's be honest, and I think they'll agree with that. It was just a waste of a parking space as far as I'm concerned. It'd be good for the public, but I wonder whether we could actually, as a council, look at opening up some of the roads. We've done it in the past where we've closed roads down and allowed originally black cabs. I'm thinking Eastrop Lane, Eastrop Lane. When that was first closed down a number of years ago, it was only black cabs, and then we opened it to private hire because it made sense, kept the fares down. They're the sort of things we should be looking at, trying to help the trade. It's a pity we can't subsidise it and get some money back off them, but at this moment in time, money's short everywhere. But they're the issues I think we should be looking at. Why isn't it working? Why aren't the youngsters coming in? Are they earning money elsewhere, or is it there's not enough trade out there? And I just wonder whether you'd make a comment on the issue of opening up roads.
I think, can I just make a comment? I think we mustn't run away from the fact that we're simply discussing at the moment the licensing of rear loading hackney carriages. More general aspects have got to come at a later point.
Just interrupt there. Sorry,
Yeah,
that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about rear loaders because of the way the hackney service isn't working for them or for the public. That's what I understood we was here for. It's not the matter of anything else. We're trying to make a trade work so the public can get transport.
Fair enough, yeah. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I would very much agree with Councillor Jones here. I think the issue here is what can we do as a licensing authority to ensure that the hackney carriage trade within the borough can be sustainable and can make a living moving forward and provide a service to our residents, which I think is the key point. If there was a plethora of reasonably priced vehicles out there readily available for the trade to use, we wouldn't be having this discussion. We're having this discussion because there is a shortage of vehicles, full stop, and those vehicles that are available are expensive. Now, I understand the trade's view that, you know, we could expend the life of the current vehicles, and in a couple of years' time there may be more availability of different vehicles. I don't think that's an unreasonable argument. I think that there are issues, as I've stated before, about the older vehicles, both their emissions and their safety. There are compromises here, whichever way we go. There is no perfect solution to this. I have set out in this report some possible solutions to this current problem, some of which will be of longer term than others. It is up to us as a licensing authority to decide how we can best support the trade at this point in time. Yeah, and how we can attract both new entrants into the trade and perhaps to look to modify how the trade operates based on some of those new entrants. There's no right or wrong answer here. There's just different things that we can do.
Thank you. Any more comments on the general question of item 3, which is, do we approve the licensing of rear loading hackney carriage vehicles? Does anybody wish to put forward a proposal on that? Councillor Edwards?
I think in this moment of time, and I think with the cost of living and the uncertainties around diesel vehicles, could we maybe postpone this decision to a year's time, but add the 2 years to the vehicle use of service?
We've already made that decision, yes. Yeah, but if you put forward a proposal that this decision gets postponed for a year, then
that's
my
fine.
Proposal. Yeah.
Need a seconder.
Does anybody want to second that? You're seconding, yeah. Do you want to comment, Robert, before we vote?
Just can I seek some clarification from Councillor Edwards? So at the moment we've, and I'm sure Ellie will just correct me as well. At the moment we have, as a body, voted to approve the increase in the age at which vehicles may enter the fleet from 3 years to 6, but there has been no vote on the actual overall age at which vehicles can remain within the with still licensed. So are you suggesting, Councillor Edwards, that you'd like to support the view that that Peter has put forward, in that we increase the age at which vehicles will remain to be licensed from 12 to 14 years? So to increase their life on the fleet to 14 years. Sorry.
Yes, but to review it next year, because we might have a clearer idea of where we're going with vehicles and the climate change emergency.
At this point, I need to ask legal, as that's not on the agenda, are we able to vote on that? That aspect of the proposal?
You are able to amend a recommendation.
Okay. Did somebody have their hand up? Yeah. Sorry, Rebecca.
Thank you. So, sorry, I have sat fairly silently just listening to the comments this evening. I think a couple of things, just picking up what Rob said, this is an ongoing dialogue that we have, every couple of weeks around this particular issue. I am concerned around the message it may give out in terms of the commitment that we have made around our ambitions in terms of being carbon neutral. Obviously, the committee has made one decision already around the 3 to 6 years to try and help with this situation we face at the moment. I almost feel that there's obviously concern around rear loading vehicles, but perhaps a sensible option might be to postpone any decision around rear loaders and the 12 to 14 years extension, because again, you're making quite a big decision this evening, one way or the other on both of those items. So I might suggest we should postpone that and bring that back to a later committee to really understand the implications of either decision that we make. But I am concerned around the 12 to 14 years and the contradictory statement that might send out.
Sorry, Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. Actually, that does make sense to me. I just feel I don't know enough. I really do. I think we're making decisions with big implications here. So, are we not revising anyway? We're rewriting our hackney carriage policy anyway later this month, aren't we? Later this year. So, we've got to visit all this again anyway very soon. And as far as the rear loaders are concerned, I mean, I'm not so concerned about safety. Not that I'm not concerned about safety, but it's always a matter of degree. I mean, if we don't want any pilots on the motorway, we can reduce the speed limit to 30. That would solve that one. But nobody wants that, do they? So, I'm not so concerned about that. Although obviously I want people to be safe, but I need to know what the implications are going to be to the trade if we do introduce these new style vehicles. Is it going to boost them or is it not? Do we need more stacked up outside the station, or have we got enough serving the railway station? You know, is it going to give a big boost to the hackney trade, or is it actually not going to help at all? Just make it more difficult for the guys we've already got? I don't know, and I just need to know a bit more. So I'm feeling very reluctant to make any decisions tonight because I need to know more, basically.
Yeah. Well, can I ask you? We do have a proposal which has been seconded. Do you wish to withdraw that proposal?
No, I'm interested to see what the other councillors think as well.
Yeah, but we've got a proposal which was seconded, which means we've got to vote on it.
Yeah, so I'd like to go ahead and see what the outcome is.
Yeah. Okay, right. Proposal. Can you confirm exactly what your proposal is? No, we've got a proposal. We've had a second. We now need to vote on it.
Excuse me, Chair. I want to speak on the proposal.
I'm just trying to find out what.
She's already made it.
Yeah.
It's already set.
Well, I'm just asking her to confirm exactly what the proposal is.
So the proposal is for this decision on rear loading vehicles to be postponed by 1 year and to increase the vehicle service from 12 to 14 years.
Okay, right. Council, yes. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, sir. I can't support this. The reason being, I can't see that there's any mileage in it. Any mileage in it for getting new people in the trade, if I'm honest. I don't like postponing stuff. I really don't as a committee, but I think we're sort of talking in circles in a funny sort of way. We're all trying to square the circle and saying, well, we want something good, but I don't think we know, if I'm honest with you, which way we're going. And perhaps we ought to have a designated meeting on this one issue rather than anything else, or even perhaps have a meeting that's not a committee meeting, just to discuss the issues and then have our meeting. At least we know what we're actually talking about. And even if we got the trade in to explain their side of the problem, not up here for 4 minutes, but have a proper discussion where they can say to us what they see, then go away. We don't have to ask questions, we just want to know where they're coming from. And then we as a group of people can make that decision, because it's not just about taxes, it's about the eco, the pollution and everything else. But what we can afford, what we can't afford, because my fear is if we carry on like this, we'll end up with no trade at all, and it will be private. And that is my fear. Thank you.
Right, Councillor Harvey, and then we need to vote on the proposal which is before us.
I was just going to agree with the idea of postponing the part of but not doing the 2 year bit. That's the split of the two. I think obviously the officers have brought a series of proposals this evening that they think is the best way of trying to support the industry. I understand that. We've heard from the industry themselves this evening what they think. I just agree with the point, if we're going to have a review, as Diane rightly says, later in the year, that is a comprehensive review, let's just draw it all together and do it comprehensively rather than picking it off bit by bit to try and give the industry just some certainty. Let's just do it once and for all in a complete way, in a way that establishes what the rules are, end of story. And if we're going to do that in November, let's try to achieve that and work with that. But I respect the reason why it's been done this evening and why you're trying to do it this evening in the way you are. But I go halfway with the motion.
Councillor Edwards.
So, from listening to Councillor Jones and Councillor Harvey, can I now amend the proposal and just? He's right. We are going round in circles because we're trying to do what's right, but it's quite difficult to make a decision when I can only hear it for 4 minutes. So I propose then we postpone the decision on rear loading vehicles, and that's it.
Does anybody wish to second that? Councillor Concheca. Right, we now have a proposal. The proposal is that the decision on the rear loading of hackney carriages is postponed until such time as it's decided we might wish to discuss it again. Can anybody, may we have, can anybody who wishes to support that proposal please show? Right, that proposal is carried. Thank you very much. So that brings us on to number 4, delegate the authority to the head of Environmental Community Services to make the approved changes, which there aren't going to be many, but there we are. It's over to you. So we presumably nobody's got any objection to that. Thank you very much. So that brings us on to item 6, agenda item 6, review of the work programme.
So the only bit missing from the work programme on the agenda obviously is the review of the taxi policy, which will now be slotted in for November.
and we will have a look at putting in a meeting in so more clarity can be achieved before that date.
Okay, everybody happy with the work program as laid out in item 6? Agreed, thank you very much. Item 7 doesn't apply, item 8 doesn't apply, so the meeting is now finished. Can I just thank the portfolio holder for turning up, because it's always very beneficial, I think, at these committee meetings if we have the portfolio holder present, in order that the committee can ask questions if they wish